And I went downstairs and my dad was there and I said, I know I'm supposed to submit and I know I'm supposed to have sex when he needs it so that he's not tempted. And I've never said no to him in 17 years, Dad. I swear I've never said no. Even when it's 3 times a day, Dad, I've never said no. And I always act like I'm enjoying it, that I've done everything you and Mom told me, but he's hurting me. And I'm sick. And last night I passed out and I'm scared.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I've done everything right. I've done everything you told me. And he looked at me and he said, you know, some women go through menopause early. And I just remember thinking, I can't live this lie.
Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from ToLoveHonorAndVacuum.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based, biblical advice for your sex life and your marriage. Mm-hmm. And I'm joined by my daughter, Rebecca Lindenbach.
Hello.
As we are getting ready to listen to part 2 of Alyssa Wakefield's story.
Yes, and it's good.
Yeah, so last week, Alyssa Wakefield, who grew up in a Gothard homeschooling fundamentalist family, was sharing her story leading up to the courtship and betrothal, which was arranged by her father, her husband's father, and her husband without Alyssa's permission. Mm-hmm. And she was just sort of informed, this is the one that God has for you. And that led to a very disastrous marriage, which Alyssa is now free of. And we're going to hear more about that today. You know, we really are about healthy and evidence-based.
Yes.
And the problem is that in far too many segments of Christianity, it hasn't been healthy nor evidence-based.
It's been purposely ignoring the evidence so they can keep pushing their agenda.
Yeah, and it's been about power and control, and that's had disastrous effects. So I hope you listen to part 1. If you haven't, it might be a good idea to turn this podcast off, download part 1, and listen to Alyssa. And now we're going to pick up from right where Alyssa has just been told by her family that this is the person that God has for her, even though she doesn't like him, she's not attracted to him, and he's 10 years older than her. So here's Alyssa.
So I have now no choice. The men have lined this up. Now I just need to get excited. I need to find a way to get excited. And within a week's time, I felt a lot of pressure in that week that they couldn't believe Alyssa didn't just say yes, go with God's will instantly. So a week later, a phone call was set up and I said, okay, I'm ready for this courtship, but I think you need to know. I couldn't lie. I said, I think you need to know I'm not interested in you. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm not worried about that. I'll win your heart. You know, a true man who cares about a woman cares about her heart and how she feels. Mm-hmm. Who cares if she's not interested? You know, but when men are taught that she doesn't have agency, that you're about to get, the father has all the agency and you're about to be the next guy in line that gets all the agency.
Yep. And she's just your reward. She's just your reward. How long was this courtship before?
Well, you know, courtships have to be fast so you don't have temptation. You know, that's kind of the line of reasoning. And they have to be chaperoned by family because you can't have temptation because all guys think about is sex all the time. So, you know, it's very guarded. And the purity culture times intensity at that point. And so we were to write letters. There was, I think, 6 letters. And it was mainly him sharing all his standards from modesty to music and all of Bill Gothard stuff. Right. And then we had a family get together twice before I had an engagement ring on my finger. So that was 3 months, maybe less than 3 months from the day that he told me the dads gave permission. And then in 10 months time from that walk that I just described, I was raped on my wedding night. So that was a very short, very fast. And I think we might've seen each other 3 times before engagement. And May 31st to this last Tuesday would have been 25 years.
Wow.
To that date. And I am, as of April 27th of this last spring, 4 years free.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
Very, very, every day. I'm so happy. I'm so happy to be alive.
Yeah.
And just brief, when you marry somebody who has of all those theologies and doctrines, an entitlement to a woman's body, an ownership over her, a umbrella over her. I didn't understand. Probably one of the first awakenings for me was about 7 or 8 years into the marriage, where I really began to have this deep awakening from the robotic programming. I was sitting in a place somewhere, I don't even remember, and I picked up a secular magazine, which we're never supposed to do. I'm never supposed to pick up secular magazines. But I noticed an article. It said something about a story of escape from a Muslim woman.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
I took a deep breath and I thought, no, I'm not supposed to read these worldly evil magazines because they're not Christian. They're not brio, but I'm going to pick it up. And I scrolled to the back, and there was a picture of a Muslim woman in the head garb and everything. And it just said her story of escape to Canada. And I just was reading word for word. And I just tears streaming down my face because it was my story. And I had never related to anybody ever. Nobody understood me. Nobody knew my story. Nobody knew how I felt. Nobody knew what I had gone through. And here this Muslim woman had my story.
Yeah.
And I thought, how could this be? And she got away. She got away. She had to marry someone 10 years older than her that she didn't love because of the fathers. And he was abusive. And he owned her. And the father owned her. And then the father basically sold her to him. And then he owned her. And then he almost killed her. And the story's going on. I'm just like, here I am, this good, godly Christian mom of many. And why do I only relate to this escaped Muslim woman? And it was this, I don't even know how to explain that moment for me. I think I was 27. I think I've been married about 8 years. And I just remember thinking, I can't live this lie. I'm living this lie for all these men. For my dad, for his dad, for him, for his brother. No one even knows about the brother's side of the story. Nobody knows that the dads actually blew it, that this was the second choice. Nobody knows the truth. And I'm living a lie for all of them. I began to, at that point, speak up. I went to my mom and I began to say, is it normal for a husband to need sex every day, like a couple times a day? Is all birth control wrong? Because this is my 3rd miscarriage and I've had 8 babies. I mean, I began to ask questions like, are we sure this is normal? Is this right? I feel like I'm dying. Is that normal and okay? Yes. Suffer for Christ. Christ suffered. Okay. Got it. I'm not sure he's supposed to be doing this to me. Don't talk about your husband behind his back. That's gossip. Oh yeah. Okay. And every time I would go for help to the godly people in my life, the Christian counselors, the homeschool speakers, the world-renowned people that are adored all over, that everybody goes for marriage counseling for, I was handed love and respect. I went through the entire series a decade into this abusive relationship because that was going to cure Alyssa and get her submissive back to him. Because I was beginning to break.
And your parent, and I think you told me too, your parents went through the biblical counseling program at John MacArthur's church.
Yes, as well. Yeah. So when I went to my parents, every time I went, I was just given horrible information. You need to have more sex. Are you sure you're fully submitted? Is there something that he's maybe upset about? Did you talk back to him? Maybe it's because you opened your own bank account. That's probably it. That's independent. You need to fully, it was always something. I'd be like, okay, I'll go back and try harder. So it was always go back and try harder. And I would come back, and I remember talking to my dad in the kitchen. This was about, 8 or 9 years ago. And we were living with him for the 7th time because he couldn't keep a job and couldn't provide for all the 10 of us. And so we were constantly back into my parents' house, which gave them control over and over again. And I went down to the kitchen because I'd had the flu and I had a fever of about 104, and I just had our 8th baby. And I was very sick, and I was homeschooling everybody, and we were without a home. We lived in my parents' upstairs, and I thought, I don't know if I can go on. I think I'm going to die. I don't think I'm about 110 pounds. And it doesn't seem that anybody seems to be noticing that. And I want to be here for my kids. I love these kids. I want to be a mom, but I think I'm dying.
Mm-hmm.
And I went downstairs and my dad was there, and I said, I know I'm supposed to submit, and I know I'm supposed to have sex when he needs it so that he's not tempted. And I've never said no to him in 17 years, Dad. I swear I've never said no. Even when it's 3 times a day, Dad, I've never said no. And I always act like I'm enjoying it, that I've done everything you and Mom told me. I said, but he's hurting me. And I'm sick. And last night I passed out and I'm scared. And I have babies.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I've done everything right. I've done everything you told me to do, and all the books told me to do, and Love and Respect I've done, and I think I'm dying. And he looked at me and he said, you know, some women go through menopause early. And I sat there, I was like, I said, Dad, I'm not going through menopause. I have higher sex drives than he does. I'm sure of it. And of course I could say that because I'm like, I'm not getting anything. And if there's another way I'm dying, it's the fact that I'm never getting a release here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure that's not it. And he said, well, you know, some women just go through menopause, and, you know, women have less sex drive than men. You need to understand where men are coming from. I was like, did you not just hear what I just said? If you,
Yeah.
Try it again, Dad. And I remember just being like, how do I make a man that's been so brainwashed into all of this culture understand that his daughter's dying? How do I do this? So I looked at him and I said, Dad, I'm only 35. I think I was 36, and I'm not going through menopause. I got more firm than I normally do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm not going through menopause, Dad. I said, what he's doing to me is wrong. There was no response. There was nothing. He couldn't hear me. Mm-hmm. And I turned around that day and I walked out of the kitchen. I walked back upstairs, and something switched in me. And I remember saying to God as I was walking up, I have lived my whole life for this man in that kitchen. Every decision I've made, to even be married and be abused by this man, because I didn't call it abuse at that point, was because I obeyed him, because he was the voice of God. He was the leader of our family. He's still leading me, telling me what to wear. I would get emails on, don't wear those shorts, don't wear those pants. You know, I was still being led. I was still married to him, as well as my father-in-law, constantly telling me what to do. So, and these are the men leading out in these movements. Something switched that day, Sheila. And I can only liken it to that Jesus saves women.
Yeah.
Because even my therapist told me, she's like, I don't understand how you came alive to know the truth, because there was nobody in your life speaking it. And she's right, 100%. I had nobody in my life speaking to me truth. The only way I was finding truth was reading the Gospels and reading about Jesus and going, why is nothing matching up to Jesus that I've been taught and told and being treated like? And Jesus was just shining in to all the brokenness. And I felt like the woman at the well, being seen and heard by only one. And it was the creator of who I am and my being and my agency and my body. And he met me in the most broken, I wanted to die. In 17 years of marriage, at that point, I had never said no. I had never had a bad attitude. I had done the perfect love and respect. And that week was the first week that I said no to him. And it wasn't a no and angry. I said, you know, can we take a break today? Because I'm sick and I need some rest. Maybe in a couple of days, like maybe 2 or 3 days. And his response was, "Are you kidding? I can't go to work until I have sex."
Wow.
I had created, through obedience to this theology, a sex addict.
Yeah.
He didn't care about me. He didn't love me. It was very clear. But he was addicted. He didn't need porn, ultimately.
Yeah, you was porn.
These teachings literally allowed him to have a full-time, around-the-clock porn star who was taught to enjoy it. Never talk about him. Never say no.
Yeah.
Send him his pictures. Make him happy.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Married Sex by Gary Thomas says you should send him naked pictures so that neurologically his brain will focus on you instead of someone else. And then when your marriage falls apart like you, he's got the naked pictures.
That's right. And so you are just an object of use. You are not in an intimate, loving, mutual, Jesus-focused relationship.
Yeah. It's got
you are
nothing
in
to do
a
with Jesus.
sex cult. You are in the church of the sex cult. I mean, that is what it was. And what was crazy was I was so awakened during, I hate to use that word because people use it of, oh, she's woke. I don't like to use that, but I don't know what else to use, as there was an awakening in that time, which I believe Jesus brought about, and in my deepest, darkest need. And he said, "I'm here with you." And in that knowing that he saw me and he heard me, I had courage.
Yeah.
And I began to speak up for the first time. And it wasn't in a dogmatic, unforgiving, bitter way. It was reasonable and honoring and loving. I would even say, I'm not saying no to sex. I'm saying, can we think about me too? And there was this habit that he had, that he couldn't go to church without sex, because if you went to church not having sex, it was too tempting to go to church, because women dress up at church, right? So you always had to sex on Sunday morning. The problem was I was also responsible to get 8 kids ready. So it was very stressful, and you have to be on time because, you know, when you're in the ministry, you have to like have the show, right? So
was your ex-husband, he's a pastor? He was a youth pastor, was he?
He was a youth pastor. Then he worked for Vision Forum. So Doug Phillips ministry. And he wanted to go into full-time ministry the entire time that we were married. The only reason he didn't at times was because he couldn't provide for all of us. And so I was constantly appealing to, if you go into ministry, you know, we have 8 kids here, but I'm not allowed to work outside the home. So it's a very stressful thing. Well, you're just supposed to accept that being in missions and ministry is to go without food. You're just supposed to, you know, accept that. That's part of being godly. So, you know, you have all this programmed into you. He now is a pastor. After our divorce, he has gone into full-time ministry along with the business that I helped build before I left. But there's plenty of victimization there for people to follow of the same mentality. Yeah, he is in ministry. Yes.
If you're listening to Alyssa's story and you're thinking, I do not want to parent like that. I want to learn how to parent my kids in a way that honors them, not tries to control them. Well, I've got some hope for you. On June 21st, I am hosting a totally free webinar called Compassionate Discipline with Wendy Snyder from Fresh Start Families. Wendy was on our podcast a couple of weeks ago talking about Jesus-centered parenting, positive parenting, how we can discipline and guide our kids in a way that doesn't break their will, but instead nurtures it and helps them to make good choices. You do need to register. It's totally free, but the link to register is in the podcast notes, and I hope to see you there. So how are your kids doing now?
Well, we are healing.
Yeah.
And we all experienced abuse of different forms. All of us experienced financial abuse, which is a very real thing. I didn't know that was a thing until I got into therapy. Good, godly women. Natalie Hoffman is amazing. Her book was a lifesaver to me.
Is
Her
it
book
me?
was the first
Is it me?
one that I read. And I just sat there like, what? Where's this been my whole life?
Yeah.
And then Shannon Miller, who is a therapist out of Dallas, Texas, who speaks. She's also a believer, but isn't a Christian psychologist per se, but is a Christian who studies psychology. I've just so appreciated all of her writing and her encouragement, and how she exposes narcissistic abuse, but also different types of abuse. Her book on financial abuse blew me away. I had no idea. But this is often the case. When you have spiritual abuse, you have so many other elements of abuse typically tied in with it. And I didn't know until I got out of all the brainwashing that I was financially abused to an enormous degree, as were the kids. We didn't know it wasn't normal to have one meal a day. That's normal, right? Oh, you guys are all so thin and healthy. No, we're starving. We are starving. And he has all control over all money. So the kids all went to work by 12, which is not a bad thing, but it is when you're doing it to feed your face. So we are all at different healing spots, Sheila. I was treated like a child. I was never treated like a wife. And I would say that the 10-year different thing that we talked about, I was never treated like a mutual partner or a friend. I was treated like someone to raise, someone to train. And so we didn't have a marriage that was a mutual, or even a friendship. And again, like I said, for me, I didn't even have physical attraction.
Right. That's awful.
Every sexual encounter is an obedience to God.
Yeah.
So every sexual encounter is rape. So
yeah, because you couldn't consent. But one of the big things is that it wasn't just there wasn't consent to sex. There wasn't true consent to the marriage.
That's right. Absolutely. I've asked myself the last 4 years since getting free, Alyssa, who would you have been before everybody else got a hold of you? Maybe that's what your purpose is for the next 40 years of life. Find out who she is.
Yes.
Because that is so glorifying to God, to be who he created you to be. I mean, ultimately, that's the greatest worship we can give him, I feel, is he makes us exactly who we're supposed to be. And then, if we have parents that get in there like, no, we're making you mini us. And that agency is stripped and that autonomy is stripped through physical abuse, which I believe spanking is, but also spiritual abuse and emotional, mental, psychological, in some cases, homeschooling being used as an isolation tool from the world so that your parents are your only compass. So that when you actually get into real life and to reality, you have no compass. You have nothing there to direct you. You don't even know what your favorite color is. When I got out of my abusive relationships 4 years ago, I found a little notebook in a bookstore, and it was just questions to ask yourself, like to find out who you are. And I was just like, who am I? And for 4 decades, I had been told what to be and how to think and what to believe and what gets you saved and what doesn't get you saved and what's godly and what's pure and what to wear and what to say and what not to say. And I couldn't even tell you what my favorite food was. I couldn't tell you what I felt, what color I liked, like how I really, what style do I like? Do I like bright colors, or do I really only like neutral colors? I mean, like, who am I?
And that's what people need to understand. And when we're sharing theologies about how male headship and how men make the decisions for their daughters and how men are the leaders of their family and how, when we're spreading the courtship theology, we need to be very, very careful.
If you do any type of study into child psychology or development, this whole concept of parents and dads leading the relationship for a daughter and the encouragement to do it young is tragically destructive.
Yeah.
And I don't care if the girl is saying it worked for her, or it went okay, or it ended okay, because it doesn't make the process right or the theology correct.
Yeah.
I know there's some who will say, but I courted and our dads put us together at 19, and he's a great guy and I'm happily married. Fine. But that doesn't make the process that went down and the headship and the leadership and the control that went down right.
And it also, for so many people too, they don't even understand the harm that was done to them until years later.
No, they don't.
And it really is tragic. Yeah.
And then when it starts to unravel and it takes years it doesn't happen overnight. I'm still in that process. I may be for the rest of my life.
Yeah. That's okay though. Life is about growth. Well, Alyssa, I really feel honored that you told your story for the first time with me, and that this was your story. This wasn't your father's story or your father-in-law's story or your ex-husband's story. This was your story, and it's an important one. And I know that for years you felt like you had to portray this perfect model for Jesus, but I think in the brokenness today, you've really pointed people to Jesus, and I know he's going to do a lot with that story.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing me.
And he's going to redeem this.
Yes, I believe that fully. And,
yeah.
The last major conversation I had with my dad 4 years ago when I divorced, which was tragic for them because divorce is never an option. Mm-hmm. And he sat me down in his office. One of the first things he said to me was, there was no compassion or thought. It's just like, now, remarriage is sin of adultery.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there and I remember thinking, that's the last thing on my mind right now. I have 8 kids to rescue and get custodial custody of and to take care of and to get a job. And I'm not leaving to find another man. I'm not leaving because I feel like there's hope out there somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm leaving because Jesus loves me and this isn't love. I'm leaving because Jesus sees me and hears me. I'm leaving because Jesus knows the truth of what happened 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm leaving because Jesus is with me and he is what I need.
And he is rescuing you.
And he is rescuing you. He is a rescuer.
Mm-hmm.
He binds up the wounds and the broken heart. He is amazing. He is a hero. When you find out who Jesus truly is and how he treated women, it blew me away.
Yeah.
Blew me away. I was like, wow, he's nothing like these men. Jesus is amazing. I want to follow that man. And he's telling me to get out of here. I'm following him.
Amen. Because what these men are after is not Jesus. The men are after power and control.
That's right. Every day that I breathe on the outside of that cage, and I would say, Jesus has walked with me every single day. I couldn't afford a lawyer because all my money was tied into him. And so I had to represent myself and be my own lawyer, go to court. Everyone told me, you will not get custody of those kids. There's no way. It's 50-50. Texas is a patriarchal state. Everything in the way. And Jesus walked with me. You know what? Jesus is in divorce court. Mm-hmm. He sat there with me. Jesus is in custody battles and in lawsuits. He has walked me through every single one to 8 kids and me into safety. Mm-hmm. As we cling to him and follow him while we're being told, go back and reconcile, go back and do this. Yeah. You're evil. You're this, you're that. The name calling.
Well, Jesus said that his sheep know his voice and they follow him.
That's right.
And I'm glad that you recognized his voice.
And that's the key, is raising kids, not to hear our voice, but to hear his voice, to listen. And if we're just about making them hear our voice and we break their will to listen to our voice, we are taking away that agency and autonomy that gives them that agency to choose his voice and follow his voice and hear his voice.
Well, thank you so much, Alyssa.
Thank you for hearing my voice today.
I'm really glad that she's safe now.
Me too. And my goodness.
She's honestly such a strong woman. I've been emailing her a little bit since last week when the first one went up. And I am so glad that Alyssa's story ended well in the sense that she was able to leave and she did get custody of her kids and she did find the strength to leave. We didn't have time to go into a lot of details on that part of the story because we're running short of time in the interview, but she is in a good place now. I know though that a lot of people's story is not that they get custody.
Yeah.
And that things don't go as easily. And so if that is you, just please know that we really feel for you. And I encourage you to follow Gretchen Baskerville, Sarah Mcdougall, who'll be coming on the podcast later, and others that can help you navigate those waters. And we're just hearing from so many women who are their eyes are being opened that they're in an abusive situation that they never realized. And 2 things happened to me this week, which really solidified this. The first was the John Piper last Friday, so the day after Alyssa's podcast dropped, put out a terrible podcast.
Truly horrific.
Truly mind-bogglingly awful about what a wife should do if her husband is harsh. And we recorded a Facebook Live about that. I'm going to put that live up as our podcast next week, I believe, so you can hear. But basically, he completely ignored the reality of emotional abuse.
Yeah.
And it was very damaging. The other thing that happened is that I watched the Netflix series Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey about the FLDS.
Oh.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to watch that yet.
With Warren Jeffs. And it was really good. But what was so sad was, even though this is an extreme cult, so many of the things they believed are echoed in things like Gothard and in the fundamentalist movement, and seeing women as some people who have to be controlled, and how they're victims of temptation was really eye-opening. So that's a great series I highly recommend. While we were talking to Alyssa, she told her story, but then in the middle of it, she often had these great insights on specific topics. And so Katie, my daughter and my video editor, took portions of those and wanted to put them at the end so that we could comment on them a bit. And so I want to jump in and let Alyssa jump in on what she thinks about modesty.
And I am brought home after girls' school, and I become my dad's full-time secretary at church because with the purity mindset and the evangelical mindset, you don't want to put the pastor in temptation. So you don't hire women, and you have to hire a daughter or a wife to do secretarial work because, every woman's a temptation.
Right.
So my sister and I literally worked full time, taking turns being secretary for the church, because there was my mom's fear that if she wasn't there or we weren't there, by all means, then the temptation, right? So we're like the gatekeepers for my dad, me, my sister, my mom, because if you take on this doctrine, gosh, our work is cut out for us. From the time we're little girls. We have to be the gatekeeper for our dad. We have to help our mom. We can't make our mom feel insecure either, though. So my relationship with my mom was very stressful because my dad's need to constantly cover me was urgent. So if we got into the whole modesty thing, one of the biggest traumatic things I went through as a teenager was the modesty thing. I wasn't built like my mom. I wasn't my mom. I was this walking temptation to all men everywhere. So I carried enormous shame. I walked like this. I wore baggy clothes. I wore long dresses. I wore long skirts. I wore baggy shorts, anything to make sure I wasn't causing men to sin. And I was constantly reminded that that was my responsibility. So I carried this enormous weight. And part of that made me want to get married young. God help me. I don't know how much longer I can do this. This is really tough, so there was a lot of pressure to 24/7. Constantly to help all men everywhere. I mean, and as an empath, that's a compassionate personality that's raised to be gentle and quiet and all these things. I mean, I took the job seriously. It is my job to save men. I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to do as women? I mean, and if you don't, and if somebody comes to you and says, hey, you're not dressed modestly and so stumbled over you, I mean, the guilt and the shame of that, right? For those of us who truly felt that God had called us to that, was, can't eat for 3 days. Oh my God, I can't come to sin, So, it was intense. It was intense stuff, but it filtered into even my relationship, very toxic with my mom. So I went home and was not sent to college because I was going to get raped at college. There's men there, and so I was kept at home, and yet I was graduated from homeschool. So what was I going to do? Well, I needed to be his secretary, because then mom wouldn't have to be there and dad didn't have to hire a woman, and I could save the show.
Did they pay you? Did they pay you?
I did get paid a little something for it. Okay. Not much, but I did get paid a little something because I wasn't allowed to work anywhere else, because if you work out in the world, then you're going to get hurt because there's men out there. Right. I was terrified of men. I mean, this whole thing, when you take it down to it, I was just literally terrified of men. I was never accused of being a flirt anywhere ever because I was terrified to talk to men, because I had been taught, and my mom taught me, all men want is sex, always. God made them that way all the time. That's all they think about. And not only are you the gatekeeper, but you know how terrifying that is to be taught that.
You know, the funny thing is, like, you're explaining this, and and yes, this is coming out of a fundamentalist conservative thing, but that's exactly the same message that Gary Thomas gave in his book Married Sex.
Yes.
You know, he quotes this neuroscientist who supposedly says that men's brains are always taking in sexual stimuli and they're always at the ready to seize a sexual opportunity. Like, this stuff is being taught in mainstream books still.
Yes.
It's
yes,
not
absolutely.
It's not just the fundamentalist.
My dad would literally sit me down and he would say, the reason you cannot be friends with guys, I wasn't even allowed to be friends with guys. He's like, you cannot be friends with guys because guys are incapable of having friendships with girls. They're incapable of it. They have to have more. There's no guy out there that can just be friends. And I'd be like, Dad, are you sure? Like, I know some guys that treat me pretty decent. Like they just want to be my friend. No, they don't. They only want sex. So I was constantly told this. Well, it worked because it made me terrified of guys. So my dad had complete control. I mean, 100% control because I believed him. Now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, was he telling on himself or what?
Yeah, I know. Like, why do these men not realize that? Yeah, exactly.
Because the truth is, since I have been out and about, they don't know that actually some that can be friends. And it's a good thing because in real life and reality, we have to work with men.
Yeah.
You know, and now that I'm in the real world day in and day out, it's like having to learn life for real. Have real conversations with real people and real men without objectification, without sexualizing everything.
I really love how she said that her father was telling on himself.
I know. I can't. Okay. But like, the thing about these kind of sectors of Christianity is that these men think that they are the most godly men in the world.
Yeah.
And they can't be around a person who is not their child or their wife without having sex.
I know.
Like,
how is
what
that
the
godly?
actual crap? And that makes me think, like, what are their experiences? Like, how many of these men in hyper-patriarchal sectors of Christianity are having multiple extramarital affairs?
Well, and actually, there was a part of our conversation that I've decided not to put on the podcast, where Alyssa talks about some of her experiences with higher ups in the Doug Phillips organization and with the Gothards. Like, sexual abuse really was rampant there, and that's been well documented.
Because names were
involved. I
can't.
Yeah. But you know, this had, like, in these hyper fundamentalist purity culture places, sexual abuse was rampant.
Well, and it's not just even sexual abuse. I'm not talking about sexual abuse alone. I'm talking about just, are these men genuinely seeking affairs the second that they are given a chance to? Are these men
watching porn like crazy?
Because I can't imagine being at the point that the only way that you don't automatically bang someone upon entering a room is it's your daughter.
Yeah, I know. Like, it's just ridiculous. And I find that a very it was interesting how that affected her relationship with her mother too.
Yeah. Because
she felt like she had to make her mother not feel insecure.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is a very, very ridiculous situation. And the fact that she was married 15 years and both her father-in-law and father are still sending her emails about what she can wear and what she can't wear.
It's so creepy.
It's just so creepy. Okay, let's turn to the next bit where she talks about how this is actually just a sex cult.
Yeah.
But see, the truth is the purity culture sexualizes everything.
Yeah.
It makes sex God.
It's like a sex cult. The whole thing is a sex cult.
Sex cult. Exactly. No, I say I was raised in a cult and it was a sex cult. Everything was about sex and about men and about marriage, how to keep it or how to make it or how to make sure you didn't have it. That was literally like the basis for everything.
Yeah.
And I look back now and I'm like, I mean, even getting my will submitted to my parents was so I would be a virgin. I mean, it was like, oh,
right.
Okay. I mean, like, you look at it now, it's just like, we were in a sex cult. This is crazy. And especially for some of us, much deeper so.
I have been saying that in a lot of evangelicalism is just a sex cult for years.
Yeah.
Especially the purity culture evangelicalism. Like the whole hyper conservative focus on sexual perfection that is swept in over the last 30 years. It's turned evangelicalism from it's turned that form of Christianity from a religion that's about serving others and helping the community to being about judging people based on what they've done with their penis or their vagina lately.
Yeah.
Like,
no, totally. Because
is.
I remember as a teenager, the way that I decided whether someone was a Christian or not was what they believed about sex. It wasn't how they acted to other people. Now, I'm not saying that that what we believe about sex doesn't matter, but it's like, it's such a narrow definition. It was the only thing that mattered.
Yeah.
It wasn't how they treated the poor. It wasn't how much they read their Bible. It wasn't any of that. It was what they thought about sex.
Yep. Whereas, you know, throughout the Bible, over and over and over and over again, we are told that our true religion is not about whether or not you've had sex before. You know, true religion is about taking care of the widows and the orphans. True religion is about, like, serve the sheep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Keep yourself unstained from the world. Sure. But also.
But that's a natural repercussion of knowing Christ. It's not the way that you know Christ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be caring for the widow and orphan, that means caring for people like Alyssa.
Yep.
And that's what we need to do. Okay. Let's get into our final word in my conversation with Alyssa. And this is what I want people to understand. I think this is why I love you on social media and why we've connected so much, is because this is the essential message that we have, is like, we're not saying all of these people are abusive, but when you follow ideas that erase women, whatever you do to the least of these, you did to me, we're erasing Jesus.
That's right. The fruit of removing the way Jesus sees men and women and replacing it with this man-made concept and idea is abuse. It is abuse, and it will have the fruit of abuse. And so I think even there's plenty of people who don't have abusive hearts per se. And yet if they adopt doctrines and follow these theologies, whether it's Focus on the Family or John MacArthur or Doug Phillips or Bill Gothard, or for some of the earlys in the 80s that may remember Jonathan Linville. There's just so many men after man after man after man. What we have theologies and doctrines that erase love.
Yeah.
And that is who God is. He is love. So we're erasing God. We're removing him out of relationship. We're removing Christ out of the parent-child relationship. And yet we're doing it in the name of God.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy. That is why we see in droves my generation that was raised in the evangelical church running from it.
I think that is the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
Yes, absolutely.
When
it's taking God's name in vain.
Yes, when you attribute to God what is so obviously not of God. Exactly. What is so devoid of love. Right. And what is at heart controlling.
Mm-hmm. And it's really taking and using aspects of the Bible and removing them from the personhood of Jesus Christ and using them to manipulate and mold, to be able to control, to be able to use, to be able to objectify. And ultimately, a lot of times, I'd like to say it all comes back to sex.
Yeah, you control women's sexuality so that then when these men get married, they get sex on demand.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I said at the end of the podcast last week, and I want to reiterate this again, just how honored I feel that Alyssa did share her story with us. This was a very brave thing for her to do. She still has family members that are very well known in fundamentalist homeschooling circles. And so she will be getting flack for this. And so keep her in your prayers.
Yeah, and if you have any words of encouragement, comment them and we'll send them her way.
Yeah, we will send them her way. I don't think she's looking at the comments.
That's a smart idea.
Yeah, but I've been sending her things her way. I know that many of you listening too may have recognized this is my story. I am in an abusive marriage and I don't know what to do. Or maybe like Alyssa, you've left, but you feel lost. And one of my good friends, Sarah Mcdougall, I think I recommend every day, at least 5 people follow her on Facebook. She's such a tremendous ethical advocate for women who are coming out of abusive relationships, coming out of betrayal trauma, and trying to get them help, practical help. And she's got a new app, and I want to invite Sarah onto the podcast now to tell you about TraumaMAMAS. I'm so excited to bring my friend Sarah Mcdougall on the podcast. Sarah and I were on a webinar together a while ago that I was hosting, but I think this is the first time we've been on the Bare Marriage podcast, isn't it? Sarah is awesome. She is an amazing abuse advocate, and she's a TraumaMAMAS supporter and does some great stuff on Facebook in a lot of private groups that she runs, and we're good buddies. and I'm really excited about what you're doing right now. I think this is an awesome thing. We've just been talking on the rest of the podcast about how some women just have it really, 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 really bad in marriage and they need to get out. And when you've had it really, 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 really bad and you get out, you're just off in a mess. And so how do you pull yourself up? And that's where your app comes in. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, thank you, Sheila, for having me today. And hi to everyone. I pop up on Sheila's page and make random snarky comments every now and then. And sometimes I try to make really compassionate ones and not be snarky all the time. Let me just put my little halo right back on. So I'm a co-founder of Wilderness to Wild. And I'm also a domestic violence survivor and child sexual abuse survivor. And I've been a trauma mama, which is a term that I coined for mamas who are parenting after trauma. Now, I don't know if there are other people who've used it before, but I specifically kind of came up with it for our demographic, our group of women who are parenting while healing. And that's really one of the hardest things to do, is to stay strong for your kids while you privately fall apart and rebuild yourself after intense pain and betrayal and heartbreak and sometimes poverty and pennilessness. I mean, so I had that happen in my own life. I was a clergy spouse for 13 years.
Yeah.
And then in my mid-30s, I had everything in the figurative house that I thought I had been building for the prior decade burned down around our ears. And I don't mean a house fire, although those can be traumatic too. I mean, I discovered that it was no longer safe in our family to stay where we were. And so surviving that, my kids and I were homeless for 4 months after that. And I didn't have a job for several months. And we were existing out of a suitcase apiece in our car, and the hospitality of friends and family members and relatives and distant cousins, and, just trying not to wear out our welcome. And it takes time to just get out of survival mode. And a lot of times you feel stuck in survival mode. It takes time to come out of the fog and let the fog burn off so that you can see things clearly and start recognizing things that were abuse that you may have just taken as normal because you were conditioned to accept them. It takes time if you have been courageous enough to seek safety and you got out and you escaped and you lost all of your social circle and maybe even your relatives and family connections in the process. It takes time to rebuild and find safe new people. So all of these things are part of that trauma mama experience. And if you throw in divorce, custody battle, trying to protect your kids in case they are in danger from the other parent or other relatives, legal fees, perhaps you were a stay-at-home mom, maybe you were a homeschool mom. Suddenly you're faced with, do I put my kids in school? Now I have to go get a job. Did I have the skills for these jobs? Did I have training, or did I expect and plan for my life to be a stay-at-home mom? And I was going to rely on my husband, and now I can't. It's like trauma on every level. Finances, emotions, betrayal, spiritual abuse, often if your church does not support and keep you safe, parenting, family court, custody problems, feeling afraid for your children's safety, having to figure out how to pay for these astronomical legal bills. Maybe you have medically needy kids. A lot of times, trauma mamas end up having autoimmune issues. They end up getting cancer. They have fibromyalgia. They have other health issues, or you have a child that gets diagnosed with ADHD or autism or some other kind of thing, and you feel like you are spending your entire existence just trying to keep some of the balls in the air. There's a lot of material out there right now, more than there were 10, 15 years ago by a long shot. But there's a ton of increasing material about recognizing abuse, about understanding betrayal trauma, if you're married to a porn or a sex addict, about recognizing financial abuse, recognizing domestic violence, and even how to make safety plans and get out. Like, it's even on public news. Like, there's cases all the time that we hear. But once you're out, you're in this long slog until usually your youngest turns 18. And if you have little ones, that is a very long time before you can be completely free of whatever it is that you've gone through.
Right.
And yet there are ways to heal so that those things are not controlling you and keeping you broken while you're waiting for that, like for the last baby to grow up or whatever else is going on. And that's why we created the TraumaMAMAS app, because like 82% of Wild's audience is on mobile. Everybody's like, every mama I know is on her phone. Like, this is your lifeline. You might forget your glasses, you might forget your pants, but you do not forget your phone. And so like every mama's that I know that's going through this is finding community online.
Right.
Finding support online. COVID and pandemics and lockdowns, finding counseling on Zoom, getting therapy online, telehealth conferences for your kids for doctor's appointments online. Everything's on your phone. So we thought, you know what? There's literally nothing or very little for trauma mamas who are going through this stuff, this long haul stuff.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I know it's going to help so many people. You know, when you were just describing all the things that women go through when they escape these destructive relationships, what I'm thinking is nobody would go through that just on a whim.
Oh, for sure not.
They don't do it just because one day they wake up and they say, you know what, I just don't want to be married anymore. I'm not saying divorce like that doesn't happen. I'm saying that it's very rare that people are going to let themselves be homeless, that they're going to stop being a stay-at-home mom and go out and get a job and deal with all of this stuff on their own if there's not a good reason. And when people come to you and say, and it's not always women, but it's primarily women come to you and say, I can't do this. This is dangerous for me. We need to start listening and not just assuming they're being selfish, or they haven't tried hard enough, or maybe they haven't read their Bible enough.
I know that there are situations out there where there are selfish reasons for divorces. I don't personally think I know anyone personally who just had a selfish reason for a divorce, but just to be generous, I'm sure those exist.
Yeah, I know a couple. Yeah.
But you know, we have about right now 5,000 women in our private support groups from 45 countries, primarily United States and Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, South Africa. Those are our top sources. Nigeria also, and Kenya have a lot. In general, when a woman is willing to be homeless, to leave behind her social circle, her church, possibly family, definitely friends.
Yeah.
The more comfortable thing to do for all of those things is to stay in the abuse.
Yeah.
That's familiar. It may be awful, but it's familiar. And at least your bills are paid, right?
Yeah.
You're not homeless or moving into another home. You may be scared at home, but you're at home. And I'm not making light of those situations. I'm saying that leaping out into the unknown is absolutely terrifying. And few people do that without having long since passed their limit.
So what does the app do? So once they've left and they're desperate and they feel alone, what sorts of supports can they get from the app?
Okay, so we have multiple things. First of all, the app is a free download, and I'm just going to show it to you right there. Do you see that one? That one right there?
Yes.
So you get inside and you will see that we have a start here, and it talks about what you need to know. First, it introduces the coaches. It introduces the different types of supports and things that are available. And then we have quizzes. We have quizzes like, are my resources safe? Or how safe have my resources been?
Because we all know that a lot of Christian resources have not been safe.
No, but the quiz helps you validate whether those, the unsafety, that sense that you felt, like why? because it points out the things you should be looking for, and that any resource that is healthy and safe should be able to give you.
Yeah.
So it's super educational and validating. And it also kind of gives you a score range as to just how bad your resources may have been and kind of how much trauma you might have had going along with that. And then we also have a PDF download with a safe or unsafe checklist. And we have a bunch of statistics that go with that for the geeks, the ones who likes to geek out among us. You know, we have some nerds always. Some people are like, just give me the highlights. And some people are like, I want to know all the dirt. I want to know all the statistics and the everything. Then this one is huge. The next one is called the Hotlines. And we have researched more than 200 global territories and regions. And we have identified hotlines and helplines for gender-based violence, domestic violence, and support for women in local countries, territories, provinces around the world. And we also have a list of a few dozen places that have nothing. So that it's very obvious, like if you're in one of these, we don't know of anything, but here are outside resources that could help.
Right.
And it makes it easier that if something does happen, maybe there's an NGO that starts in one of those and we can get notified of that, we can add it on because we know exactly which areas are kind of empty. We also have a section called the support, and this is links to private confidential support groups for a number of types of trauma, whether that is family and court trauma, whether that is betrayal trauma, whether that is a grandmother who is maybe trying to figure out how to support her daughter and grandchildren who are going through trauma, child sexual abuse recovery, different types of things. Then we have a couple of in-app upgrades for those who want something more. So we have all of that. That's all free content. It comes to everyone, everywhere. The app is free everywhere in the world. And we wanted to make sure that all of the crisis content, there's no charge for that, because we don't believe that anyone who is trying to get safe or just trying to figure out which way is up in the fog should ever have to pay for directions out of the fog.
Right.
I don't think that's ethical. But then for those who are out and who want more, we have an in-app upgrade called the Resources. And the Resources is $1 a month. Like pretty much affordable almost anywhere in the world if you're in a developed country.
Yes.
And that gives you, okay, so over the last 10 years, I have gleaned like Thomas Jefferson's library of resources, right? Like I read voraciously. I'm always bookmarking links and things that are useful and stuff, just free stuff that I find anywhere from anyone that is reliable and useful. And I'm curating that. So I decided to take my library of curated stuff that I use to give to coaching clients and to other people when I'm doing workshops or presentations or intensive trainings. And I decided to collate that curated library of stuff. And for $1 a month, I will send you a fresh resource link to something. Podcast. I've got podcasts of yours and articles of yours in there.
Oh, awesome.
Book links, PDFs, white papers, apps that you can use, just checklists, whatever that I have found out of that curated stuff for like, there's years worth of it. And you get a new one every week. That way you don't have to just like go into like, here's one mass list of Sarah's favorite links and you need to spend 15 hours combing through everything. I do it kind of in a gradual thing, in a logical order based on when you might join on the way up.
Right.
And so that's the Resources. And then we have a support community specifically for those who want post-trauma growth. And that's called the Trauma Toolkits. So I have a co-founder with Wild, and her name is Bren. And she is an ITR, that's Instinctual Trauma Response Certified Coach. So she does profound amounts of research into proven trauma tools for both moms and kids. So our toolkits include expert interviews from people like Dr. Evan Stark, like the guy who originally started writing about coercive control, Dr. Dan Allender. We have law enforcement professionals. We have security professionals. We have web and IT professionals for all kinds of practical stuff. And you get like a checklist, 5 steps for some action plan you can take in this expert area. And then we have trauma tools for mom, trauma tools and psychoeducation for kids too. And then we have spiritual comfort with just something that is cozy and makes you want to wrap up with a blanket and just breathe for a little while. So
I
try
love
to cover
that.
like all the bases. And there's a private community like off of Facebook right in the app.
That's awesome. And most of our listeners probably are not in trauma because we're here to improve our marriages, which is great. But I think we all know women who are. And so just keep this in mind. TraumaMAMAS, it's a great app that you can suggest to them to help them through what is really probably the most difficult time in their lives, where they're going to feel helpless and alone. So this is a tool that you can suggest that can help them get on their feet.
You are a pastor, if you are a pediatrician, if you are an attorney, if you are an OBGYN, any of these kinds of fields, labor and delivery nurse, midwives, we have those professionals talking to us often about how they run into women who need resources. And this is the perfect kind of free app download resource.
Amen.
If you're a professional that comes in contact with a lot of other people.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Sarah. Again, people need to check out her page. We will put a link to it, her Facebook page, Sarah Mcdougall there. One of the things that I find really inspirational about you is that you are about growth. You were in a terrible place in your life, but that's not where you are today. And isn't that what life with Jesus is supposed to be? That we're not stuck, even when things seem hopeless and helpless. God's grace is amazing. And he can take us places that you couldn't even have imagined. Like, can you imagine that you would ever be doing this?
You'd asked me 10 years ago if I would be making an app today. I'd be like,
yeah.
So by the way, the link is traumamamas.app/get.
TraumaMAMAS.app/get, and we will put the link in the podcast notes too. So thank you, Sarah. Go find her, everybody. She's awesome to follow, and she has a lot of wisdom.
Having me. Y'all have a good day.
Yeah.
I think what's so hard for so many people when you are, leaving, especially if you've been in a patriarchal, abusive situation, is the entire rug is taken up from under you. Because a lot of these women, they haven't had to make decisions for themselves for a long time too, or maybe a lot of their agency has been taken away. So having that practical step-by-step instructions that Sarah's giving in her app, having actual access to not just, here's the overall philosophy of what you should do, but hey, here are steps you can take today to do X, Y, and Z. That's just, it takes so much of the mental load off of figuring out how to protect yourself and your kids.
Yeah. And so we highly recommend TraumaMAMAS. Go check that out. Check out Sarah. And thank you so much for joining us again on the Bare Marriage Podcast. And we will see you again next week, where we tackle some more things about emotional abuse, John Piper, and patriarchal advice.
See you later.
Bye-bye.